Good morning, Christchurch, and the rest of the world. So day 2, trying to do a little video. So since the onset of Corona crisis, as I'm calling it, I felt like life has kind of been in fast forward and slow motion all at the same time. So in some ways, everything I used to do in my day just stopped. But in other ways, it was all replaced in a moment with childcare and managing different expectations. And so half of my life slowed down and half of it sped up. And I think all of us are just struggling at the moment really to know which way is up. But in the midst of this, Paul's advice to the church in Philippians, so still chapter 4, verse 9, Paul says, "Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put into practice, and the God of peace will be with you." So Paul, who was like one of the first apostles in the church, he did and said and taught a lot of stuff. And so on the one hand, putting all of that into practice is totally impossible and seems like a really unreasonable expectation. But there's something really simple, I think, in what he's trying to say this morning about just putting into practice what we're learning. So all of life at the moment is being rearranged around social distancing and self-isolation. And many of us, though not all of us, and I'm thinking particularly this morning of those on the front line in the NHS and in education, for whom life has not slowed down in any way, but just sped up to, over 100%. And we really need to keep praying for them and holding them up in our prayers and asking God to sustain them, because some of the stories that are coming from the front line are really quite scary. So kind of if that's you, this is kind of excluding you in a way. But for a lot of us, we have this unique opportunity at this moment to do life differently and to start up some new habits and to rethink our priorities, because lots of the things that we thought were priorities suddenly got taken out of our life. So I think this is a moment unlike any other, definitely in my 34 years of life, this is a moment unlike any other to reassess what is really important and what my priority is. And in many of his letters to younger Christians, Paul's a bit of a father figure in the church, and he spends a lot of his time writing to other men and women in the church to encourage them. And he often uses this metaphor of like physical training or a race, and that following Jesus and learning to follow him and to be shaped into his image is a bit like preparing for a race. So many of us, not many of us actually, sorry, could run a marathon today. I definitely couldn't. There's very few people in the world who could wake up this morning and be like, 26 point something miles, here I go. But almost all of us, if we wanted to do that, we would need to train. We would need to reestablish some kind of patterns of exercise, and we would need to keep doing it day after day after day after day until we're ready to run a race. And Paul uses this same kind of image, I think, here when he says put into practice the advice that we've been given. In this letter so far, Paul has said loads of things about anxiety, about rejoicing, about prayer. But the reality is that we cannot just give up being anxious overnight. We can't just click our fingers and go, right, I'm not anxious anymore about anything. And we can't just on demand muster up joy and rejoicing and thankfulness from nowhere. Often we forget to pray in the midst of a situation where really prayer would have helped. I don't have on hand automatically unlimited patience. So I do shout at my kids in the midst of what's going on, because I haven't really practiced not doing it. So Sarah, I was chatting to her yesterday and she said to me, "Mummy," in that voice, "my teachers always say that if you practice, practice makes perfect." And it's kind of one of those annoying little sayings, but there is real truth in it. And I think in this strange and surreal season where everything has changed, this is a moment to practice some new stuff. It's a moment to write a daily list of things that we're thankful for, to establish a regular time in the day to read the Bible if you've never done that, to spend a moment in each day exclusively with your family or those in your household without the distraction of digital media, to commit to praying for people in a worse situation than us. These are habits that we often intend to get into them. We intend to pray, we intend to spend time with our family, we intend to be thankful and grateful, but we also don't really have the time to do it. We don't have the time to get good at it. But for many of us right now, we do have time. And it's not the time we would have wished for. This is not the moment that we were hoping for. But I think for all of us, as we try and figure out what it means to live in this moment, we can choose to make use of the time that we have instead of waiting for it to pass. So this week, there's things that I've done that I've been meaning to do for like years, and I just always excuse myself and say I don't have the time to do that. But actually this week, like, I've got up to pray. I've played my guitar. I've sat in the garden with my daughter and done watercolours with her. We've sat together as a family and had breakfast and shared what we're worried about. And that stuff is not always possible. But actually, I wonder if it's a bit more possible than we think it is, but we just need to realign our priorities with what's really important. So Paul ends this morning, as he often does, with a promise. He says, the God of peace is with you as you do these things, as you practice. One of my favourite Christian thinkers is this guy called Dallas Willard, and he once said, that grace, so the grace of God, the love of God, is not opposed to effort, it's opposed to earning. Earning is an attitude, effort is an action. Starting new practices is difficult. We can't just sit here and expect God to magically transform us and put brilliant habits and patterns in our lives. It requires effort to practice new things. It doesn't come automatically. That's probably why it's called a practice. We have to keep doing it. So in this totally uncharted territory for our nation, for our communities, for us as families and individuals, let's practice the things that we always thought were important, but we made a whole bunch of excuses for the reasons why we didn't do them. And let's remember that as we practice, the God of peace will be with us. See you later.